keynote speaker will be Ms. Santri Djahimo. Santri Djahimo will do a presentation on an investigation of EFL teaching practices in Indonesian rural schools. Ms. Santri Djahimo, as we know, she is the lecturer at English departments in the Faculty of Teacher Training, the undergraduate study in Nusa Tenggara University, but she is also a lecturer of the postgraduate English study department in the same university. She is currently the head of language laboratory of FKIP Nusa Tenggara University, and also she's been doing a great job as a researcher and also a member of Women in TESOL International. She has been involving in a number of events, both national and international, at the level of presenters and keynote speakers. These are in the innovations, position to state, and last but not least, on TEFL and TESOL. A number of publications that she has published both as author and also co-authors. Just briefly, I mentioned a number of it, and the title of equality in COVID pandemic era, and it's also a cultural review on a song used in Lagu-Lagu Dancing Alor, and many more that she has been publishing in different journals. But so apology if I didn't provide extensive elaboration on your presentation, but I think we are ready for your presentations for today. The time is yours, Ms. Santri.
Thank you very much, Ms. Linda. Hope everyone can hear me loud and clear. Well, sometimes the connection is not stable, so the voice is on and off. Sorry about that, but hopefully everything's going to be okay. Well, as has been mentioned earlier, my topic today is about an investigation of EFL teaching practices in Indonesian rural school, and it's actually a research result that has been conducted back in 2019. Why should I deliver it here? Because to me, it's still applicable. I have tried to find out the condition and during the pandemic and after. Well, it's not really over yet, but at least students are going back to school now, and the condition is more or less similar to the time when I collected the data. So without further delay, let me start my presentation. First, as usual, I'll show you the contents of my presentation, start with the background, followed by research questions, objective, theoretical foundations, method, and this is the key issue, result of my study, and I'll end up by giving you conclusions and closing remarks, of course. Well, there are several differences between living in urban and rural areas, right? Everyone will agree with that. First is about living standard. People who live in urban areas have high standard of living, and that makes them have a fast-paced life. While those who live in rural areas have low standard of living, and it will lead to peaceful life. It sounds, to you, it might sound subjective, but it's true to some point. And then the next difference is about here, physical condition, geographical condition. In urban areas, as you can see here through the pictures, it's very crowded. There are many tall buildings, huge, giant buildings. All you can see is buildings everywhere. No, almost no empty space for your kids to play. Well, there are parks here and there, especially in big cities, but some parks are even artificial, not real, plastic trees and so on and so forth. And in rural areas, as you can see, mountains, green colors, trees everywhere, forests. It's very peaceful, and empty spaces are everywhere. Now, it's general point, actually. Now, I'll narrow down to more specific differences. And it's about the classroom, the place where the students learn, the place where the teachers teach. In rural schools, students have more or less a condition like the one in the pictures. The digital tools are in their hands. They can apply the things or the projects that have been mentioned by Dr. Lindsay previously. They have to learn like 21st digital skills and so on and so forth, because they are being supported by all the facilities. But can you think of the students in rural areas? They do not even dream of sitting in front of the laptop or PCs or any other devices, or teachers do not even dream of bringing the digital tools into the classroom. All they face every day is only whiteboard, even blackboard and chalks. The next one, I'll try to wrap up the whole things about the differences. So generally speaking, when we're talking about schools in rural areas, they have more or less similar conditions, either geographic conditions or teaching and learning conditions. And these conditions will create a kind of problematic issues and make teachers, especially EFL teachers, are reluctant to teach in rural schools. This is because there are several challenges that they think they might encounter. And these challenges, these problems will lead to the poor quality of teaching and learning itself. As I mentioned here, these common challenges will eventually influence the way teachers teach, and it has potential to affect the teaching and learning quality of both teacher and students, of course. There are two research questions to be answered through this study. The first one is, what is the teaching practice in Indonesian EFL classrooms like? And the second one is, what are the real problems, or what are the existing problems encountered by both teachers and students in teaching and learning process? In line with the research questions, of course, there are two objectives. As you can see here, the first one is to report on an investigation of EFL teaching practices. And this has been seen from three different contexts: physical, cultural, and socioeconomic. And the second objective is to explore the real problems or the existing problems faced by not only teachers, but also students in relation to the common challenges, particularly in the process of teaching and learning that can have potential to affect the quality. And this study has been based on some theoretical foundations, and I've tried to highlight four of the important things that I think might relate to my study. The first one is about the difference between teaching conditions in urban schools and rural ones. And then the second one is how these differences can affect on many important things, including teachers' performance in their teaching practice, and of course, learning performance in the learning situation. The third one is, there are some factors that can discourage teachers, that can make them demotivate to teach in rural schools. Again, I have seen from the three aspects mentioned previously, physical, culture, and socioeconomic. And the last one is there is a big challenge in the way teachers implement teaching method, the best teaching method for the best result. And it's kind of difficult for teachers to be able to adjust themselves to the changing curriculum. You know, in Indonesia, there is always changing in curriculum here and there. So it's difficult for them to adjust to it. Why? Because they lack of skills. Well, I'm not trying to generalize that all teachers in rural schools are like that, but mostly. And I'm now reporting the finding of my research. Okay, here's the method. Just take a look, and a short look at it. The study has been carried out in this province, Nusa Tenggara province in Indonesia. And I selected 40 EFL students and 8 teachers from 4 different schools in 4 different rural areas. And the way to collect the data was through interview. Actually, there were several steps in the interview. And the questions were more or less about actual teaching practices. So here come the result of study. In general, I divide into 2 big findings here. The first one is there's an indication that both teachers and students have common classroom problems. And the problems can make the teaching and learning process becomes less effective. And then the second one is, well, it's sad, actually, looking at this fact, that some teachers almost never come to school. Seriously, I'm telling you guys. And some of them still use the very old, or we can say non-contextual teaching materials. Now, let me unfold my findings based on those 3 aspects I mentioned before. The first one is physical constraint. Physical constraints here relate to the limitation or restriction of physical or material aspect. And cultural constraints are about the limitation or restriction involving culture or cultural aspect. And when I'm talking about socioeconomic constraint, I'm talking about the limitation or restriction on social or economic aspect, especially time, money, and resources. Some findings might overlap, like, okay, the finding in cultural aspect might be in socioeconomic and vice versa. But, well, I'm trying to at least to report whatever I found in my research field. So let's come to problems of teachers. First, physical constraints. I've listed down several constraints. The first one is teachers have not been distributed equally and fairly between schools in urban and rural areas. This point refers to the number of teachers. So when we are talking about the number of teachers, I believe that most of us, especially if we are Indonesian, we do agree with this issue, right? The number of teachers per February 2021, based on the statistical data from the Ministry of Education, is 2.6 something, 2.6, 2.7 something. And 80% of the number are in rural schools. Only 20% are teaching in, what I mean is 80% of teachers are teaching in urban schools, and the rest 20% are teaching in rural schools. Now you see the imbalance in the number of teachers, right? So what I'm saying is they do not teach in rural areas because the problems I mentioned earlier. And I have found out those kind of problems as well during the interview with both teachers and students. That's why I put it in my list as the top one. And then the second one, lack of in-service training. And it will lead to the third one, lack of professional teachers in terms of having the knowledge and the skills in teaching. Again, there is a kind of imbalance here. They don't give the same chance for all teachers, either in urban or rural areas, to get this kind of service training in order to be able to develop their career for their professional development. Because the chance mostly is given to those who teach in urban areas. Okay, let me move to another slide. Still, we are dealing with the list. Teaching quality, I think it still relates to previous problems because lack of in-service training. So of course, the quality is, the quality remains the same. They can't improve the quality, their teaching quality. Lack of references, this is interesting. What I saw, because I was there, I conducted this research several months before COVID-19 pandemic. So I was still able to go there to visit, and I did direct observation. What I saw was several teachers came to class to teach without having any references at all. But, well, we can think that, okay, everything is in his or her head. So whenever he or she comes in the classroom and starts talking, blah, 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 and that's it. But my point is, no matter what, references are needed. References become the basic of what they are teaching. I remember there is a saying that the best teachers teach from the heart, not from the book. But that's not the way teachers interpret this quote, and so they come to the classroom without any references, right? So this is become one of problematic issues about teaching in rural schools. The next one is weakness of educational management. We're talking about education management. We're not talking about teachers. We're talking about schools. We're talking about education department in province of this republic. So it's such a big issue. Lack of tools and infrastructure, lack of equipment. These two become the two top reasons why teachers do not really want to, or I should say, tend to not teach in rural schools because of these two reasons. An environment characterized by poverty. Well, there are quite many writings about it. How poverty relates to the poor quality of education. But it's not the time for me to talk about this issue in particular. Okay, now let's come to cultural constraint. Cultural adaptation, it's hard for teachers to adapt to the culture of the locals, especially for those who do not come from that place. Because, well, there are several teachers from outside and they come to teach in a particular place, and it's not easy for them to adapt to the locals' tradition or the local culture. Students' negative attitudes. Not all students like English as a subject, I should say. And less participation of students, yeah, because they have negative attitudes towards English. They don't really like English. That's why they do not participate much, or they just come to school, sit nicely, listen to the teachers talking, and then when it's time to go home, yeah, bye-bye. There's a communication breakdown between teachers and students because, again, they have negative. So the negative attitudes will lead to many negative things. In this case, I should say one thing leads to another. Locals are difficult to accept new features from outsiders. They're not really open up their mind to accept things from outside, even for their best. Socioeconomic constraint, attitudes and beliefs, yeah. A tendency for a particular group of people in society to be reluctant to accept new ideas. I mentioned before in cultural constraint. And traditional ceremonies are on the top of everything. This is quite interesting. When I ask the students about, let's say about references, they said, oh, they didn't have anything. They didn't have either books, either textbooks or dictionaries. Why? Because their parents couldn't afford it. And when I tried to convert to their teachers, the teachers said, well, they can't afford for all things related to school's need. But when they have like traditional ceremonies, a marriage, what is it? When there are things related to their family and relative, then they can spend like millions. I'm telling you, when I'm saying millions, literally millions. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I put it here. The traditional ceremonies are on the top of everything. So when they're trying to make a list, number one, traditional ceremonies, and then blah, 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 education is the last one, the very last one. Okay, now let's come to students' problems. Again, I'll start from physical constraint. The distance between home and school, very far away. Can be 5 to 10 kilos, and they have to walk to school. How they get to school, of course, they don't have any transportation, and the condition of the road is not really good. They don't have any breakfast before attending class, and this relates to socioeconomic. That's why I mentioned before that there's a kind of overlapping here and there. Lack of supporting facilities to help them in the teaching and learning process in the classroom. Or not really, lack of supporting facilities. In some schools, even no supporting facilities at all. I'm showing you the pictures of their road condition. This is the way they usually go to school. Like in rainy days, it's going to be muddy like this. And in dry season, it's going to be hot, really hot. And some of them say they feel like if they have to walk, like in the morning, they have to go to school. It's okay. It's not really that hot. But when they come back home, because it's in the afternoon, so they feel like there are 2 suns above their heads because it's very hot. This is the condition of their schools. One of the schools here. Well, the good point is the schoolyard is big, huge. They can run, they can play, they can have space for themselves to do like physical exercises. But the condition of the building is, you know, it's sad looking at this thing. And these are the condition of the classroom. As you can see, no facilities at all. Yeah, if you want to say that chairs and the small tables are facilities, then yeah, that's it. That's the only thing. It's a bit better, walls, but still, it's no better than the ones in urban schools. Cultural constraint. There's a tendency that among students to use local languages most of the time. In several areas, students do not speak Bahasa Indonesia really well. So in their daily communication, they use their mother tongue, they use the local language. And it's going to be a problematic for teachers who do not speak the local language, especially for those who come from outside. So let's say teachers who come from Java comes to the particular areas and they don't speak, they don't understand the local language, then it's going to be a kind of, there is a kind of communication breakdown here. And why they do not want to look into English, because for them, English does not belong to the local culture. So they don't need to learn English. They don't need to speak English. Even one of the students say, why should I learn English? Native speaker won't come here anyway. So what is that for? This, the attitude of students who are afraid of asking questions as they don't get used to speak up in the classroom. I think this does not only happen in rural schools. Typically, Asian students, especially Indonesian students, are like this. It's because the way they've been brought up. Parents always say, or I should say parents always give instruction, don't talk back, especially to older people. So if someone who is older than you, your parents, your teacher talk to you, do not talk back. All you do is just be quiet and say yes and amen to that. And I don't know, I think they don't realize that they're bringing it up in a bigger environment. For example, in the classroom, they are afraid to talk. And in the teaching and learning process, especially English, because English needs students to talk, right? We as teachers, we need them to participate, actively participate in the teaching and learning process. When they're afraid to answer a question or to ask questions, then I don't know, but it's not learning. It's only teaching. If we teachers, we talk in front of the classroom without giving chance for our students to ask questions or to answer our questions, then it's teaching, not learning. Learning does not take place in that kind of situation. Socioeconomic, yeah, it's more or less similar to teachers' problems, attitudes, and beliefs towards schools and teachers. They tend to have negative attitudes, and these negative attitudes lead them to, I should say, not to like this school subject, this English as a school subject. And it will decrease their motivation. They will feel like demotivated towards English, and they have a family condition. I mentioned before, like their parents cannot afford to buy books, to buy dictionary. But again, when we're talking about traditional ceremony and all, that's another story. Okay, another problem, limited parental budget for providing children with resources. Yeah, textbook or dictionary. And students do not even have breakfast before school. Can you imagine they have to walk like 5 to 10 kilometers without having breakfast? And at 10 o'clock, while their teacher are teaching in front of the classroom, they are falling asleep at the back because they're tired, they're hungry. And there's lack of school budget for more, there's a lack of school budget for more teaching materials and enough books. Some schools even do not have teaching materials at all. I mean, teachers have to struggle a lot to find the materials by themselves. Despite all the problems mentioned earlier, teachers have tried hard to find ways, to find solutions, to give better service, I should say, for their students. So I put here as teachers' positive strategies. The first one is they always give motivation. I think it's students in rural areas badly need this kind of thing. If they can't they can't feel like enjoy this lesson. Teachers have to be able to give them motivation all the time to make them interested in this kind of lesson. And so they start enjoying it. Find interesting teaching materials that they usually find from the internet if there is a connection, but several schools are in the black spot area. So even no internet connection at all. Using games and songs, yeah, even no internet connection, teachers can use this kind of method to, to make their students enjoy in learning English in this case. Provide extra time for students to practice. There are 2 teachers, if I'm not mistaken. They really provide their time, their extra time for out-of-class learning. And it's well, I really appreciate that kind of work. Group work, and do self-reflection and start joining activities relating to CPD. CPD is continued professional development. So teachers in rural areas start thinking about how important continued professional development is. By joining these kind of activities, they can improve themselves in terms of teaching quality. And by improving themselves, automatically they can improve the output. They can improve their students' quality. Okay, here my conclusion. Yes, there are several problematic issues in teaching in Indonesia, particularly teaching English in Indonesia. It has its own problems, of course, and this can create negative atmosphere. And this kind of condition can create impediments, not only to the teaching and learning process itself, but also to the intellectual, emotion, and social development of either teacher or students. And my last conclusion is this kind of complexity is, well, because there are many problems, one relates to another, one thing leads to another. So I call as the complexity of such problems will eventually result in low grade educational quality. It will result in poor quality and will lead to the crisis of quality in many schools in rural areas. Now let's come to the final remarks. I'm aware that the condition of all schools in rural areas is more or less similar. I mean, when the schools are in rural areas, then you can imagine the condition, right? Like I mentioned before, yeah, like I described previously. But there is some difference in how teachers and students respond to this kind of constraints. If they choose to ignore the constraints, if they think like, okay, there are problems, let the problems be problems, then they do nothing and remain in a kind of disadvantaged teaching and learning situation. However, if they choose to be able to get out of the problematic situation by challenging the constraints and finding ways to improve themselves, they will achieve more and they will be better, even though they are in disadvantaged schools. And the last slide of my presentation, I'm sure you're familiar with this handsome guy, right? He was quite popular some years ago. I think he is now. He is William Jefferson Clinton, known as Bill Clinton, right? The 42nd president of the US. I really like his quote. Education is not a privilege, it's a right. So it's a right for students either in urban or in rural schools to get education, proper education, qualified education. We can't say that, okay, it's the privilege for students in urban schools to have a better education. No, because education, once again, is not a privilege. It's a right for every student, wherever they are, what subject they are learning. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, just drop in the chat box. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Ms. Santri, for your amazing presentations. Now we have come to the question and answer sessions. Please allow me to guide this session. I have also compiled several questions regarding your research presentations. The first questions come from Welminte Juliette, and she requests to unmute to directly speak to you.
Okay.
Hello, Ibu Santri, how are you?
Hello, I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you. Thank you for presenting.
You're welcome.
Very interesting research indeed, and important. I'm very interested just to have a discussion in regards to you. In your presentation, you talk a lot about the challenges and the context of rural teaching for teachers. But my question is, do you think that it is important for pre-service teachers' education to actually include topics or materials relating to teaching in rural contexts in Indonesia? Because we have different islands, different tribes, different areas with pose almost similar features of challenges, but they are specific to each area. But do you think that our curriculum in higher education actually cater to that context, specific context of on the challenges of teachers after they graduate and then they are able actually to work in rural schools? And I believe there are lots of students who are studying at Undana, coming from rural areas as well, and experience being rural students in the past. And then as they come and then they study in Undana, I think I'm just wondering if Undana actually tailor some topics or materials into their curriculum, although there is national curriculum that actually gonna prepare these pre-service English teachers. Once they finish their degree, undergraduate, they actually have some knowledge to actually help them how they can navigate and adjust in their profession later on in life. And then, is there any topic or materials that at the moment in Undana is actually available for students to do that, either as part of the curriculum or part of the extra curriculum, or just out of curiosity, because my research is actually kind of related to English teaching as well in rural education, but in terms of designing intervention program for teachers, English teachers in rural province and islands. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's interesting question. Well, when you're talking about pre-service training, I believe it's really needed, especially if it relates to prepare them to for their teaching practice in rural schools. Because not everyone will be teaching in urban schools, right? Some of them might go back to where they belong to. And they do need this kind of skill. I call this skill because not every teacher is prepared to face this kind of situation. I mean, everyone, what I always say to my students is everyone can be teachers, but teacher or real teacher is really selected. And well, particularly if you're talking about teaching in rural school, you do need to have spatial skill. Okay. Unfortunately, until now, we still don't have that particular subject or particular material about it. We are talking about, like, I mean, you used to be one of the students, right? And you know the materials that lecturers usually provide to prepare you to become teachers. And I think more or less the condition is still the same, but I think it's a good idea. Your questions can be a good idea. You pop something into my mind that one day what is it? At least the materials. We're not talking about curriculum, because curriculum is something bigger.
That's right.
If we want to change the curriculum, everything has to be changed, and it's from, it's top down. We cannot do that on the other way around. So what I can do now is I can give a kind of recommendation or suggestion for our head of study program to start thinking about this, at least to include the features of the characters of rural education.
I think that would be
Particularly
fantastic.
English lesson, yeah, to prepare our teachers to be.
Yeah,
It's going to be great, I think, if they learn about it. Because again, as I mentioned before, not everyone is going to teach in urban schools. Well, it's good for them to be able to prepare themselves
yeah, that's right.
before going back to their hometown to teach students in that area. Okay, thank you for the questions and the ideas at the same time.
Thank you.
Risky, next question maybe.
Thank you so much, Ms. Santri, for answering the questions. Now we have second questions comes from Ms. Rita only, and I quote, "Ma'am, I want to ask you about teachers' problem, especially in teaching quality. How to measure a teacher teaching quality when students graduated from, for example, teachers training and education college? I think they already have the qualifications of being a quality teachers, but in fact, some of them still struggling in teaching students at schools. What are requirements of that?" End of quote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rita. It's interesting how to measure teachers teaching quality. First of all, teacher, you yourself actually can measure your teaching quality by looking at the output, by looking at the quality of your students. That's it. As simple as that. I mean, no particular criteria. Well, maybe the government have come up with a kind of criteria for evaluating teachers teaching quality. But to me, if you ask my personal opinion, it's as simple as you measure your teaching quality, your teaching quality only by looking at your students' quality. That's it, Rita. Hope I answered your question.
Thank you. That certainly do. Now, the third question comes from Mr. Alexander Modor, and allow me to quote his questions. "Ma'am, I have a question in one condition in class while the teacher is teaching and only some of the students are interested while the others doesn't care, and the teachers say, if you don't understand, ask your friends who already understand. What should we do if we are the students that already understand?" Thank you.
Okay, now your question is from your point of view. What should we do as the students, right, Alexander? Well, because your teachers say, if you don't understand, ask your other friends who have already understood. And if you are good students to your teacher, then you have to explain to your friends. But I want to look from another side. I want to look at your teacher's position. Back to Rita's questions, and I want to relate Rita's question to these questions. If you are teaching, hopefully there are several teachers here. Allow me to, well, at least to give something for you. If you are a good teacher, if you are a qualified teacher, and you are in this kind of situation, you try to explain to your students, the 20 students in the classroom, and only 2 or 3 students understand your explanation, it's better for you to find other ways to explain, not by throwing it away to other students to explain. It's good, but if it's a kind of peer review, then it's going to be better rather than giving them task to explain the whole things that actually belong to your job, to your other students. Rita's question is, how can we judge? How can we evaluate? How can we know whether or not we are qualified teachers? If you are one of these teachers, then you are not qualified, I should say. Sorry about that. It sounds judging, but well, I think it's not wise to put your other students in trouble. Well, they might understand your explanation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they can explain as clear as you can to their other students. So yeah, Alex, if you are a good student to your teacher, all you have to do is just explain to your other friends. But if you are the teacher, your position is as a teacher, then don't do that. You'll not be categorized as qualified one.
Thank you, Ms. Santri. And next questions come from Ms. Anggraini Valo, and the questions, and I quote, "Ma'am, I have a questions about students' problem. As a lecturer, how do you deal with students who do not dare to ask questions and express their opinions in class? Is there a method that can be applied in the classroom so that students are more active in speaking?" End of quote. Thank you, sir. Ma'am.
Well, it's going to be difficult. The situation is going to be difficult if we have to teach online and the number of students in the classroom is like 80, 90, even more than 100, because you can't control. If we're using Zoom, then there are several pages, right? How can you move from one page to another, and at the same time you have to explain to them, you have to give them tasks and so on and so forth. But if it happens offline or on site, it's going to be easier because you can have a direct interaction with them. You can personalize. What I mean by personalize is you can make a kind of, you can make a kind of approach to the students you think are not really active. And when you, let's say, one of the simple example is by calling their names. You call their names and then you ask them to answer your questions, or you ask them, okay, do you have any questions? For example, Christine, do you have any questions? And if she still keeps quiet, then you can direct them to make them brave to answer, to ask questions or to answer your questions. Many ways can be used by teachers in creating a situation where the students can be brave to say something in the classroom. But yeah, it's not easy, I know, especially in this online situation, and if you have many students in the classroom. Anggraini? That's all my answer.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And very last questions come from Dominica, and the question goes like this. The lack of facilities at school will cause the lack of academics level, as it is said that many students are tied to their localities, causing a poor response to the students. What do you think about reducing this response? Thank you, ma'am.
Sorry, let me read the question again. The lack of facilities at school would cause the lack of academic levels. Okay. As it is said that many students are tied to their localities, causing a poor response to the students. Many students are tied to the localities, causing a poor response to the students or to teachers. I'm a bit confused with the questions. What do you think about reducing the response? If what you mean is because they are too tied to the localities. In this case, maybe their language, their mother tongue, and their tradition, and so on and so forth. And it causes a poor response to their teachers. I think in this case, teachers are the one who have to make effort. Teachers are the one who have to make effort to create a better response for students. Well, like it or not, teachers have to do that, because in Bahasa Indonesia, it's said, guru pahlawan tanpa tanda jasa, right? Teachers are unsung heroes, if I may translate into English. So pahlawan tanpa tanda jasa, you have to do whatever it takes to create better situation, to create, in this case, better response. In positive way. Okay, Dominica?
Thank you so much, Ms. Santri. I think that we have come to the end of question and answer sessions. Again, it is a great opportunity to be able to hear the result of your research, and also it's giving us the ideas of to be more sensitive to the to create different approaches when it comes to teach to rural areas. Now I'll give back to Ms. Linda to continue to the next program, and I hope to see you again.